everyone, welcome to another great session. My name is Richard Carrion and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Refersion. Today we have a special guest, Darren Hall, President of Vera Bradley. Thanks for joining us, Darren.
Well, thanks for having me. And hopefully this is helpful for all the people who are watching us online.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit more about Vera Bradley? I've known Vera Bradley for quite some time, especially as the bag company, but I know you've expanded your offerings now and also some acquisitions as well, like Pura Vida, for example.
So Vera Bradley, I get like the elevator pitch of the company information is Barbara Backhart, Bradley, and Pat Miller founded a company about 40 years ago. They were on a trip and really had this moment, which was, why do women have to have the same brand, handbags, rolling luggage, these sorts of things that their husbands did, and wanted to create a company that was about, empowering women, connecting women, and sharing the individuality of what you wanted to put out there. A couple of years ago, we added to our umbrella of companies by purchasing a majority stake in Pura Vida bracelets. So trying to find a group of companies that fit that casual, comfortable lifestyle, and an awesome group of people who are also on Refersion with Griff and Paul over at Pura Vida.
Yeah, you spoke of choice, right? And consumers themselves have different expectations on where they buy, how they buy, and even how they experience brands, whether it's in a digital world or in-person world. And I would even have to say, like during the pandemic, consumers' expectations have definitely have evolved significantly. And now that we're coming back into the normal world, or kind of a hybrid world right now, they're shifting again, right? And brands have to make sure that they're on top of it. But what was also interesting is that there was also a shift of supporting more local businesses in their communities, right? So with that said, they're now expecting more personalized experiences. But I remember when we first met, you talked about two approaches that us as consumers are pretty accustomed to, but not necessarily the most satisfied with. And those were brand to many and brand to one. Can you explain a little bit more what you mean by these approaches? And can you give a couple of examples?
Yep, for sure. And I think there's a lot to unpack in what you said. I think we're all playing the game of what consumer behaviors are going to stick after people come out of lockdown. And whatever state you're in, obviously regionally very, very different. But I always use an example. My mother never bought groceries online before, and now she buys all of her groceries online. So I'm actually very interested to see, as another year goes on, et cetera, what are the behaviors that stick. But I think universally, one of the things that's been very powerful is with fewer people traveling or being locked down or going over to people's houses or having dinners in people's backyards, we've seen a lot more of connecting with what happens regionally. I think you have more of a old school mentality of marketing becoming new again, where you have the local store, the local coffee shop is winning out over some of the kind of bigger brand names and chains. And I think marketing has evolved too. And we'll talk more about influencers, but I think when we met, we talked about different ways to market. And I have a weird way of looking at things that's kind of evolved with a number of great people that I've worked with over time. And there's brand to many, which is what most of us do if you have an email list. Most first party advertising is that broadcast where you're trying to push new product launches, new information, how to engage with your brand, et cetera. I'm pretty sure everybody would do that at this point in time. I think you also have brand to one communication. So that's, you were looking at something and now it's got a price drop. You bought a product, these are other products that might be interesting to you. So most of those are really, because it's so hard to have those one-to-one conversations and they create so much content, so much specialized communication, they tend to be automated now. So an algorithm is trying to figure out who gets talked to at what point in time. So I think they're absolutely critical. I think most of the people who would be watching this probably have very successful programs that they work on, but it kind of misses the moment of personalization. So what I always talk about is spending a lot of time in the one to few bucket. So where do you find these specific areas where there's enough critical mass that you can invest time in creating specialized content, specialized responses, specialized information, and you get a payback on that. But more importantly, you get a situation where people feel like your brand is paying attention to them because a unit or a group of people that they're part of feel really connected with. And this might be something as simple, like a real common example would be VIP customers, right? You're a really good customer, so I'm going to treat you better. The airlines have been doing this forever, right? You get to skip in the line, you get to sit in better seats. That is, in some regards, a one-to-few relationship. But for the sake of marketing, I think there are other ones where you talk about customer groupings. So I would say something like organic products. You could be 6 or you could be 60, and you could like organic products. So it doesn't necessarily fit in your classic like age-based segmentation. So you may have specific product groupings. Another one, we had Sarah from Free Mom Hugs, which is an awesome organization that we support for Pride, where Sarah's in Oklahoma and she's focused on Christian parents who have LGBTQ plus children and supporting them. That's a one to few. Like there's probably not tens of million people who fit in this bucket, but it gives you an opportunity to really connect very specifically with a group of people who are important. And we're a brand that's always been about connection. We're a brand that's more about our customers as the heroes than just our brand as the hero. So how do we connect directly with those people? And we had a product launch, we had social media communications, we had emails, all that were catered and wrapped around this one to few communication, even though that group is actually quite large. But giving people an idea of how to sort that through in the head. And I think one to few is where most brands make their true separation as marketers, not in just the broadcast. I think a lot of that looks a little bit similar year to year. You know, the brand to one is kind of a marketing automation. It's that one to few that's a real differentiator.
So with that said, for the brands out there watching, how would you recommend they better activate their audiences with this approach of brand view?
I think it's trying to figure out what you can wrap your hands around as a one to few. I think there are a couple ways you could split it up, and I'll just give a couple examples. So as like a base building block, the age-based segmentations tend to be fairly simple, and everybody understands them as like the Scion, Toyota, Lexus sort of thing. Their behaviors, but they're mostly stereotypes of customers. But if you look at Vera Bradley as a brand, we're multi-generational. We have an awesome event in Indiana where we bring everybody together at the Memorial Coliseum Hall in Fort Wayne, and we have an annual outlet sale, and you'll see a grandparent, a parent, a kid, maybe their kid, like everybody together, 3-4 generations. But if you think about that as distinct in our marketing lens, you have baby boomer, Gen Z, millennial, Gen X, all kind of coexisting in this world, looking at shopping and their engagement with shopping in very different ways with very different needs, et cetera. So even in carving things apart using a simple age-based segmentation, it's how are you going to connect with people from a product perspective, a messaging perspective, and pull that together in a cohesive way. For us, it's about connecting people. And yes, there's crossover where a baby boomer and a Gen Z do want to connect with each other and they like the same products and they want to talk, but it's more common going to be, you know, Gen Z with Gen Z, baby boomer with baby boomer. How do we find people who help make those connections or help drive those activations in their specific areas? We have let's call it 150 stores around the US, but we're not, and we have customers in all 50 states and Puerto Rico, but we don't necessarily have an associate that's working in every specific area, where we've been able to use technologies like a Refersion to help enable us to have influencers in those respective areas. And I think if you have a lens on what you want your one to few to be, that helps you find people who can more authentically represent you with that group of people.
You know, in the lens of influencers, quite interesting. And I found this true for myself as well. There was a report that came out from eMarketer about US consumer adults, specifically 46% of US consumer adults were actually increasing their social media usage during the pandemic. I mean, clearly there's not much going on, right? So it's like, of course, I'm going to get on my phone. But that really created a lot of window opportunity for many brands, big and small, to get in front of those audiences organically or through influencers. And one of the things I heard from many influencer marketers, as well as affiliate marketers and people that manage ambassador programs, it's one of the biggest challenges is one, finding those right influencers within their sphere of influence. But then two is making sure those influencers are also aligning with their values. But then lastly, it goes back to what you and I just talked about, is specifically is, are they reaching the audiences that we need to get in front of, right? So there's like a three-pronged challenge that these brands are challenged with. And so what I've been hearing is a lot of people are shifting to utilizing micro influencers to drive that bottom of the funnel of activity. So for Vera Bradley, like one, because I think many companies define micro influencers differently. How do you at Vera Bradley define micro influencers?
All right. So I'll answer your question, but there was a lot to unpack in there. So I want to
Yeah.
touch on some things you said that I think are really important for people to digest. So, if you live in New York, part of the texture of living in, the five boroughs is you get on the subway, you walk around the city, you go to restaurants, you go to shows, you go to these sorts of things. You are kind of influenced by what you see happening in the street scene, which is really important. When you take the pandemic and you lock everybody up, obviously it changes the dynamic in a really significant way. I think you layer on top of that fewer movie releases, fewer music videos, fewer, you do a casting call for editorial photography and, there might be one or two people who show up versus 200 people who showed up before. So I think just the levers of when your stimulus changes, your influence changes. And that's kind of to the earlier point of the local store, when you needed contact, right? That may have been, your trip to the local coffee store may have been one of the few people you talked with in person when you were going through the days, especially back last year, roughly this time. So I think the stimulus has changed. I bring up the point of like movies and things like that because I think the local influencer has also taken on more prominence to the super influencer in this time period. And we have great relationships. We just had a product launch with Lana Condor, and she's amazing. Also, an authentic lover of the brand, and that's what's really important. So, when it comes to micro influencers, we look at it at Vera Bradley in a more simplistic way. We're about connecting people. How do we have people who help us connect others? And we're not in every location. So we're not looking at, when I bring up somebody like Lana and the authenticity, right? There are people in the business who are looking for a paycheck, right? But there are also people who are trying to connect people, trying to create an interest, trying to share information with the world. We all have that one friend that you call that knows what's going on. We're looking for that type of person as our micro influencer. And I think I'll borrow a line. Sabrina, who works here, put it in a great way. We're looking for somebody who acts more like a friend than a figure when we're going through that. And I think that's a great way of putting it. We want somebody who more organically fits in and is able to connect people, just like the friends that can make that happen.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about local businesses. I communicated with my favorite local tasting bar. They have like all types of interesting foods to try. And I would always see her post and I was like, hey, can you save me one of the chili oils? I'll come by in an hour and pick it up. So, that's so true. And I have like a really great relationship with the owners there. But I've never felt so connected with my community during the pandemic. And I think you really nailed it on the head when it comes to that, like honestly. So, we talked a lot about like how do you define micro influencers, but then also like when you were building out the program or when your teams were building out the program, how to determine like micro influencers was the right approach, especially for Vera Bradley's influencers, but specifically in the guise of driving customer acquisition.
So we have an interesting mix. We talk about connecting people. I think where we had kind of a real unique struggle is we have a very loyal customer base. We have a lot of really fantastic customers where the type of brand, when we ask for feedback, you get way more feedback than you possibly think could come. So we have amazing customers. So as we added something in there about kind of incentivizing them for it, there was a group of people, we talked about baby boomers and Gen X and millennials and Gen Z. People react in a very different way. Somebody said, like, what is it? The number one thing people want to be when they graduate from college is like a YouTube influencer or something like that. Like, that definitely wasn't on my list of career choices when I came out. So there's a very different perspective from somebody who might be in Gen Z than baby boomer, which the baby boomer may go like, well, I love the brand. I talk about the brand. I carry the brand. I talk about the brand. So that's my way of being a fan. It's much more normalized to say, hey, here's a product I like, and here's a link that you can use to purchase the product. So for us, it was finding a way of like, again, back to us, it's about our customers. It's not as much about the brand being the forefront. So how do we do that authentically? So I think for us in trying to find good ways to build out the program was how do we authentically enter the conversation and be part of people's lives without it being people having to feel like there were dollar signs around it. We wanted to share and connect and share enthusiasm and make the world a brighter place, not necessarily, be an ongoing feed of products to purchase.
Yeah, authenticity, that's such an important piece of that. And I think that really speaks to like what makes a great micro influencer for Vera Bradley, right? And you, as you said, a friend, not a figure. And I think that's super important because consumers view of influencers has also evolved and they can see through that. And so now micro influencers themselves are having to evolve and be like, hey, I'm going to have a longer lasting relationship with this brand than what used to be the case. I'll post for X amount of dollars, right? So that kind of transition into the past and the future, right? In the past of influencer marketing, it was a test budget, it was seen as a brand. I remember when influencer marketing was just starting to take off. People were like, I think it's driving sales, right? But that's actually evolved quite a bit, actually. And I remember reading another report from eMarketer about measuring the ROI and performance of influencer marketing is one of the largest challenges with managing that channel. And at Refersion, we've been really big on like that's been our whole purpose of existing, right? Being able to manage that data, have that data housed in a certain place. So for Vera Bradley, you talked about making sure it's a data driven approach. But how are you defining success currently for Vera Bradley's micro influencer program?
Yeah, so we maybe give the audience a little bit of background. So Pura Vida, the company we acquired a majority stake in, they're a long time customer, probably one of the earlier customers of Refersion. We came on the program early part of this year. So for us, the paint's still drying a little bit on what is success. But I think the important thing for us is we're looking at, can we get kind of sustainable growth with people we engage with? Can we get amplification of messaging that we're trying to put out in the brand? We had a launch of recycled cotton that we did with Lana Condor, but we also wanted local level influence going on as well, and trying to look at how those messages travel from our brand into the communities, how people use the products, how we get that to come back. We focus, we want people to follow us on social media, but one of the things that we focus a lot on around here is what's the engagement. So, we want people who are not, they're not just posting stuff, but they're interacting with their customers, or I shouldn't call them customers, but their followers, and creating a community that eventually turn into customers on our end. So a lot of it, we're looking at what's the engagement, what's the amplification of the messages, how do we sustainably build a revenue stream that feels authentic to the brand. We've probably been more picky than some to make sure that we're not kind of soiling up what the program could be just because we're trying to grow numbers really quickly. It's still really important to us that if we say, hey, we don't have a store in this part of New Mexico, but we have a launch of Harry Potter, and there's a big Harry Potter fan there that also happens to like our brand. How do we connect together to make something special happen? So we're still working our way through, but I think trying to rely on, how do you get bigger without getting bad? Like, how do you keep the engagement levels up? And how do you create content that's interesting for people so that we're not just spamming in a different medium?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And I'm not sure if you can speak to this just yet, because I know you said the paint's still drying with the program. But with that said, can you speak a little bit on the ways you are using or continuing to use data to support that strategy we talked about, the brand diffuse strategy for your acquisition channel?
Data is like one that we could talk for a long time about. I think there's one which is getting critical mass behind the program, which does net out to like, how do we have dollars? How do we have micro influencers in the program? That sort of thing. I think one of the best uses of data is just seeing where are we getting traction? Who are the people who are making those connections, and how do we support them to be stronger in what they're doing? That's been kind of in the early days, the really important one. How do you get the message out and get the initial sales? And then the follow on is how do you improve the quality of the customers that are coming through? And I think as you reach a middle ground on that, you have something that's more sustainable and more valuable for your customers because you're trading value on a more even footing.
And would you say that you're taking data from Refersion and melding that with your CDP data to kind of get a better view of the customer, I would assume, right?
Yeah, we use the CDP so we can get demographic, psychographic information. So as being a brand that's multi-generational, it's important for us to understand, if we maybe I take a step back, there used to be a zone where I guess when it was like catalog marketing, right? You had this one muse that you were thinking about when you made the catalog and you drove things through. If you look at one of our recent catalogs, you'll see more of a, younger people, older people, families together. Like there's a more of a mixing pot of what the customers are. And I think we need to do that when we do our marketing, when we choose our influencers, when we drive that authenticity, that it's kind of matching up in the communities that we want to activate. So we will take some of that data out and apply some demographic, psychographic in an aggregated way, not like trying to super snoop on people, but it's more how do we put it in an aggregated way where if we use as a muse, we have a utility, we call it utility cotton, but it's a new set of styles that we're doing in solid cotton. So Vera Bradley, historically known for quilted cotton, now we have a solid cotton product that's really awesome. In addition to our quilted cotton and our patterns, what is the customer that's gravitating towards it, kind of vis-a-vis the muse that we put out there? And how do we make adjustments and iterate through both our activations and our product sets as they grow over time?
That's awesome. Well, Darren, it's been a pleasure talking with you. It's been a great session. Every time I've talked with you, which has been twice, it's always a pleasure talking with you. You're so nice, by the way. So, again, thank you for joining us today. And I want to say thank you, everyone who is watching this session today. Darren is a great friend of ours, and like we always appreciate whatever he says, because it's always like, wow, I just learned a couple cool new things. So we hope you learn some new things that you can apply to your brand. And then also just some last minute housekeeping items. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Signified and One Rockwell. This video will be available immediately following the session. You can use the same link that was in the email. You can share it with your friends, however you choose to, or rewatch it in your own personal time. But again, thanks, Darren, for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks everybody for taking the time to watch the video. Really appreciate it.